Introducing our final speaker of the day, Jacquelyn Stevens of Wilmshire Environmental Lawyers, to give I guess, a legal perspective and some warnings and some good news and a whole bunch of other stuff. Take it away, Jacquelyn.
Thank you very much, and I'm very thankful to be here. Thanks to Sid for inviting me. I think this is my 6th year with the conference itself, the OFA conference, providing an update, a legal update on different aspects. And today I'm going to focus in on 3 areas. One, a little bit about risk and liability. Another, a little bit about some of the recent prosecutions that have happened, and looking at some alternative solvents and what regulations might apply to them. And then a quick overview of some best practices. But Sherry took the wind out of that sail because she gave you all those this morning. Anyways, we'll start with risks and liabilities. So there are 2 types of liability that a dry cleaner can face, that being civil liability or regulatory liability. And civil liability you can think of as lawsuits that occur because of a discharge, leak, or spill of a solvent that may lead to a lawsuit from a landlord or from a neighbor. If you're a tenant, you have tenant obligations that may result in lawsuits from your landlord. If you are the owner of the property and perhaps the owner of the business, you may have lawsuit potential because of migration of the contaminant off-site, and that neighbor will decide to sue you for the loss in value and cleanup of their property. Some of the causes of action we see in civil liability are negligence, nuisance, which is the loss of enjoyment and use of land, trespass, strict liability, breach of statute. So even though you have regulatory liability, you could have a breach of statute in a civil context, and you could have breach of contract. We heard from Tim Maxwell talking a bit about leases that they're involved with, where Green Earth is the cleaning method of choice. Some of those leases specifically talk to your obligations, and lawsuits can result from those. The result of a lawsuit could be that there are damages for property impacts. You may be forced to clean up your own property, your landlord's property, and your neighbor's property. There may be an injunction requiring you to stop whatever the activity is that has caused the contamination. You'll have to pay your own legal costs, so you get to pay me, and you get to pay potentially the lawyer on the other side. Not necessarily a happy position to be in. In terms of regulatory liability, we heard from Mary Ellen about the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, the tetrachloroethylene regulations, and the requirements thereunder. There's also the National Pollutant Release Inventory, which requires reporting when you use a certain amount of contaminants. Would only be big dry cleaning plants that likely fall under that category. There's also provincial regulations, and we often forget about the fact that, especially for PERC, that there are other regulations that apply. It's not just the tetrachloroethylene reg. And some of those fall under the Environmental Protection Act, spills reporting, dry cleaner training reporting, and other obligations. And then the one that's not listed here is your waste regulation, and the needing to deal with the disposal of the waste that come from the dry cleaning process. You also have municipal regulations that may affect you, either sewer discharge or Chemtrack reporting. For Toronto, I don't think there's any other municipality that has that type of reporting, but I'll touch on that in a moment. So you've seen this report, and many of you that are PERC users or former PERC users will remember putting in your annual reporting every year by April 30th. Mary Ellen went through these. I'm just going to kind of skip over them, but secondary containment, no venting to the atmosphere, all of your PERC and waste and residue needs to be in closed containers. PERC impermeable floor plugs, no spotting agents that contain PERC. Those are the basics, and you heard about those, and there are great resources on Environment Canada's website to help you make sure you're in compliance, including the checklist that Mary Ellen mentioned. In terms of Ontario's regulations, and this would apply provincially in the sense that every province has different regulations that deal with similar issues. Under the Ontario Environmental Protection Act, there are spill reporting requirements. And the regulation, or the legislation, in fact, says every person having control of a pollutant that is spilled, and every person who spills or causes or permits a spill of a pollutant shall forthwith notify the MOECC, so Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change, the municipality where you are, the owner of the pollutant, and the person having control of the pollutant. Now, in law, we like definitions. Definitions make our life a little easier sometimes. So definitions here, you'll remember in that statement it said that it related to a pollutant. So a pollutant is a contaminant other than heat, sound, vibration, or radiation, and includes any substances from which a pollutant is derived. So then we need to look at contaminant, because that's also a defined term. And a contaminant is a solid, liquid, gas, odor, heat, sound, vibration, radiation, or combination of any of those that may cause an adverse effect. Yet another definition. An adverse effect means one or more of the following, and I don't know how, oh, it is readable, good. Impairment of the quality of the natural environment, injury or damage to plant or animal life, harm or material discomfort to any person, an adverse effect on the health of any person, impairment of the safety of any person, rendering a property, plant, or animal life unfit for human use, loss of enjoyment of property, and interference with the normal conduct of business. So if we go back, we have a spill, which is caused by a pollutant, which can be a contaminant, which can be a liquid, solid, air, odor, which adversely affects humans, their health, the environment. If I go back, sorry, one more comment on that one. I don't know how to go back. That means that not only PERC may be a problem, but alternate solvents may be a problem as well. So you may be using an alternate solvent that spills, and you may have an obligation to report that spill to the Ministry of the Environment. We also have dry cleaning regulation in Ontario, and it relates to the training that is required. So no person can remove residue that are or contain dry cleaning solvents from dry cleaning equipment, or handle or manage or dispose of such residue unless a trained person works full-time at the establishment. And here there's another definition. Dry cleaning solvent is defined as perchloroethylene, methylchloroform, and petroleum solvents. So if you're a user of Intense or K4, those are petroleum solvents. They would have this training obligation on them. So they aren't regulation-free. So just to make that clear, there are regulations that may apply even if you're using an alternate solvent. Under Toronto municipal requirements under Chemtrack, yesterday there was a City of Toronto gentleman from Chemtrack there, and he came forward and he advised me, and I'm telling all of you, that alternative solvents fall under Chemtrack. They require Chemtrack reporting. Wasn't something that I was aware of, so I was thankful that he pointed that out. So I'm telling all of you, if you're an Intense user, K4, maybe even Green Earth, you may have reporting obligations under Chemtrack. There are fines as well for not making that reporting, and it's done online. There are also municipal bylaws, and I've referenced Toronto, but every municipality has sewer and discharge bylaws. And those are important for you to look at regardless of the solvent type you are using, because if it's going down the drain, the municipality may have some limits or requirements that you have to meet. And that may be different for every single different municipality. In Toronto, they do limit the discharge of PERC into the sewers. There shouldn't be any PERC getting into the sewer if you're doing your process, which we've heard about today. If you're following that proper process, there really shouldn't be any PERC from a dry cleaner going into the sewer. However, there are requirements for a pollution prevention plan to be created in order to identify what the operations and activities are and how you're preventing that pollution from happening. Mary Ellen touched on some federal penalties. There's also provincial penalties for not reporting your spills. So just a different version of the same table that Mary Ellen showed. One of the things that we did, because the fines that we're seeing for prosecutions of failing to comply with the PERC regulations are very high. They've increased significantly since there was a change in the administrative penalties regime in 2012. And some of you met my articling student Rhea yesterday. She prepared this chart that gives an idea that back in up to 2012, when the new fine scheme came in, there were a few fines, all of them under $10,000. Not an insignificant amount of money, but around 10 grand or less. Starting in 2013, we see fines increase significantly. In 2013, there was a fine of $60,000, and there was a requirement to publish in a trade magazine the fact of the contravention and the fact that a conviction had been found. We see, as you go through the list, 2015, 25,000, 10,000, 15,000, 2016, 36,000, and now we have a publishing requirement. 2016, we also had a cleaner in the Western Canada who received jail time for not complying. So that is a possible penalty. That, as I understand, was a very egregious situation, and as Mary Ellen indicated, the judge and the parties felt that that was an appropriate sentence. These are not insignificant. These are things that are really important to your business and your bottom line. And I have to say, I do act for dry cleaners, and I do defend them on these prosecutions. And it's really hard. These requirements are mandatory. You need to follow these regulations. There are a few ways to negotiate with the Crown. Maybe there's some ways to deal with mitigation. But these are serious. And I have to say, as expensive as it is to put secondary containment under your dry cleaning machine, it's a lot cheaper than a $25,000 fine. I think we can all agree on that. There are also obligations for distributors or sellers, and Mary Ellen spoke about those, and I think it was Rob that mentioned a recent situation. There was a distributor in BC who was convicted of having sold PERC to a dry cleaner, an owner or operator who did not have secondary containment system in their facility. It was a $62,000 fine. As I mentioned yesterday, I don't know whether, in fact, the dry cleaner that the material was sold to was also prosecuted. I don't know that. So it would be interesting to see how those correlate. So this is something that is far-reaching and very important. Spoke a bit about regulation of alternative solvents. So recall, we have a federal regulation for PERC. It's strictly regulated. It has operating and reporting requirements, and it has the potential for prosecution with very high fines and jail time. There are no equivalent federal regulations for the other solvents we've heard about under the federal SEPA regulation. However, we know, and I spoke a bit about them, that there are potential for regulations under the provincial process, whether it be you're keeping your dry cleaners trained, whether it be reporting spills, whether it be making sure you're disposing of your waste. And even though a product may be green, it's an alternate solvent, an intense product may require disposal through a registered disposal company. Those are the types of questions you have to assess and figure out. I indicated yesterday, I haven't been asked to figure that one out yet, but if someone would like to pay me as their lawyer to do so, I would be happy to. However, these are real possibilities of further regulation for products that we're kind of hearing people say don't have any regulations, but they may. Under Toronto's bylaws, currently, a subject pollutant does not include the alternative solvents, although it could, and it may in the future, as we see how these alternate solvents are performing in the environment. Chemtrack, as I said, was corrected yesterday, and I was thankful to receive that in fact, the alternative solvents do have to be reported in the Toronto municipal Chemtrack process. So what do we know? Alternate solvents are not regulated the same as PERC. There are exceptions. Hydrocarbons are regulated. In some ways, spill reporting is the same for any chemical, and there may be waste disposal requirements. But we also know that alternative solvents may be regulated in other ways, and that's because alternative solvents are chemicals, and they are made up of differing chemical constituents. So we also know that there's a list of toxic substances under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, including PERC, carbon dioxide, broad categories of hydrocarbons, cyclic branched or linear, completely methylated siloxanes. So there are other chemicals that may be regulated in some way, and SEPA outlines reporting requirements and remedial measures that may be required if there were a release of some of those substances. Each situation would have to be looked at specifically. So are alternative solvents the future of dry cleaning? Maybe you need to do your research to figure out what solvent is right for you as a company. I'm just going to run through quickly a few best practices. I think I have enough time. Okay, thank you. So following best practices as a business decision really isn't optional. You need to comply with all federal, provincial, and municipal environmental laws, and you need a robust environmental management system. However, having that environmental management system doesn't allow you to not comply. So you don't get to say, oh, but I've got an environmental management system, I've got reporting in place, I've got inspection processes in place. That's not enough. That doesn't get you out of complying with any of the regulations that you're required to meet. Just a few best management practices: emergency response plans, having those contact numbers readily available for fire, police, spill reporting, your municipality, maybe your company contacts, your directors, your officers, those you need to report to. You need emergency equipment as well as personal protective equipment, the lovely PPE that make us all look so very dashing. First aid is important to know, and also having cleanup procedures documented. You need a spill response plan. I saw in a couple of the videos, they had the bucket that was the spill response, and they took out the berms and the other products. You need to have those on site. You also need to, could you turn back? Oh, there we go. You also need to have your MSDS sheets. You need to know the chemical composition of the products you're using, not just your solvent, but your spotting agents, your detergents, other chemicals that you may have on site. You need to have an idea of their health effects, their first aid measures. You need your spill reporting protocol and cleanup procedures. You also need a waste management plan. You need to follow the waste generator registration requirements. You need to develop handling procedures, storage procedures that everyone in your shop knows and uses. And you need to keep records of the waste handling, storage, and disposal. Also very important to engage a reputable waste management company to assist with that waste removal and disposal. Maintenance and inspection schedules. We often forget, we're so busy, that you actually need to take time and make sure that your machinery is in the best operating condition possible. Setting up inspection checklists and protocols for things that need to be done daily, weekly, monthly, semi-annually, annually, those sorts of things is important. Also performing leak detection tests, both visual and using different devices that are available. And keeping records of and details of all of these inspections, maintenance, and repairs may help you in the future. Maybe you're sued and it has to do with something to do with your maintenance. If you have good records going back saying that you were doing exactly what you needed, that could create a defensive due diligence for you. You also need to know your machinery operating policies and develop standards that your employees are following every day. And training. Training is really important according to the Ontario reg, at least for PERC and petroleum hydrocarbon solvents, but I suggest that it's a good best management practice for every type of solvent or even wet cleaning, is to have not just one full-time employee trained, but all of your employees trained. You can't be there 24/7, or whether it's 8 to 6 or whatever your hours are, you're not necessarily there all the time. All of your employees need to know how to use and manage your systems and your chemicals and your waste. So it's very important that those are put in place and they become second nature. It's just how you do it. Other best practices, Ontario or occupational health and safety requirements, your MSDS sheets, having them current and readily available, as well as having all of your bottles clearly labeled, whether they be controlled or maybe it's just liquid hand soap. But having them labeled ensures that everybody knows what those products are. So just a broad takeaways, regardless of your choice of cleaning method or solvent, your business practices can expose you to both civil and regulatory liability. You need to be informed, be proactive, and take steps to limit that exposure. You are the only one that can do that for your business. Know and meet your obligations federally, provincially, municipally. Implement an environmental management system so you can stand up and say, we have this and we do this every day. And that's where having those best management practices come in to protect you and your business so that you can continue to be profitable. And that's it. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Oh, no, good.
First of all, this is not an opportunity for free legal advice on matters other than dry cleaning. So
well,
if you could just...
maybe not even on...
Well, okay.
Somebody that maybe used PERC historically and has moved away, is moving to an alternate solvent, but is worried about the legacy that using PERC had left behind. Mm-hmm. Are there steps they can take to try to make sure that that they know they're okay at the time they get out of the business? Is that something you could help with? Are there companies that do that? Sure.
Historic liability is a difficult issue because we heard earlier, back in the day, the environmental officers, now I'm talking a long time ago, but 30, 40 plus years ago, they would say, it's okay, you can dump it out back because it'll volatilize. It wasn't until the last 30 years or 20 years that we knew that in fact, yes, it volatilizes, but it's also a DNAPL. It's a dense non-aqueous liquid. So this is PERC. And it just goes down. And it goes to the point where it hits something, and then it gets into the groundwater and it moves. So we've learned a lot about the science of PERC over the years. The best way to protect yourself is to know what you have or what you're buying. If you're looking at purchasing, know what's there. That's the best way to protect yourself in terms of the liability. Certainly, my suggestion is always it's better to know than not know, but there may be times you don't want to know. And I'm happy to chat with anyone on a case-by-case basis when that might be. But certainly doing some testing, if you're purchasing the business, making sure that whoever you're buying from has testing done or you're going in and you're testing, that may involve a discussion about the purchase price. That may involve a discussion about indemnities or someone putting some money up as security. There's different ways to deal with it, but it's certainly something that you do need to consider, and I'd be happy to chat with anyone.
Great presentation, Jackie, as always.
Thanks,
very
Dino.
informative.
Thank you.
You know what? As you were showing one of the slides, you mentioned responsibility, and you were going down the line from supplier to operator to. If you were to go down a little bit further down the line, just say, for argument's sake, an employee of a PERC-operated plant was to get ill, perhaps terminally ill. Do we have any instances or any cases that we've seen, any precedent set where someone got sick and is now suing the business owner or the provider or something along those lines? Because I've read about those things in New York where an employee got sick, got cancer, and went after the owner of the business.
I don't have personal knowledge of those. While I practice as an environmental lawyer, I stay away from the personal injury side. However, in terms of who might be responsible, it could go back to the other employees who were operating, the directors and officers, the general manager. It's going to go back in a line of people who may have had an opportunity may have been involved in the use or the misuse of that product that may have led to the health impacts. In Canada, there is a difficult nexus, causal connection to be made between a health impact and a product. Not to say that it can't, but it's a little different than in the US. The standard that has to be met is a bit different. So is it possible? Absolutely. Do I know personally? No. Happy to have a look, though, and let you know what I can find.
Thank you, Jacquelyn. That was
Thanks very
brilliant.
much.
Good.